By the time we boarded our flight home, the trip was technically over, but mentally, I wasn't even close to being done. Because even though we made it back, the damage had already been done. Canceled flights, missed tours, constant taxis, thousands of dollars tied up in non-refundable experiences that we never even got to have. And this is the part of the story that almost no one talks about. Because when a trip goes sideways, getting home is only half the battle. The real fight starts after, when you're left trying to recover the money. And if you're new here, my name's Mary, and I teach people how to travel the world on points and miles. But this series is a little different. If you haven't watched part 1 and 2 yet, pause here and go watch those first, because this part won't really make as much sense without them. You'll find them linked in the description as well as right here at the top of the screen. But here's the short version. What was supposed to be a quick intra-Greenland connection turned into days of delays, cancellations, mechanical issues, and weather problems. And we never made it to Ilulissat, the destination the entire trip was built around. We were stranded in one city and lost our entire itinerary. We lost tours, we lost time, and we were left trying to untangle a financial mess in real time. So a few days after we got home, I finally sat down with every receipt, confirmation email, and charge from the trip and added everything up. The total came out to about $3,400. Here's what that looked like. $1,400 in non-refundable tours in Ilulissat, about $400 in meals and taxis we never would have needed, and $1,600 in Air Greenland flights we paid for but never actually flew. And to be clear, this wasn't overspending. This was money we paid for and got nothing in return. So that's where the real work began. Here's how it all broke down. First, the tours. We had booked multiple non-refundable tours in Ilulissat, the entire reason that we came to Greenland in the first place. Boat fishing, whale and ice fjord tours, a private midnight sun kayak tour, a guided settlement walk, an iceberg cruise. Every single tour was tied to a specific date, and because we were only in Greenland for 5 days, there was no flexibility. Once our flights kept getting canceled and pushed, every one of those tours became impossible to take. And all of them were non-refundable within 14 days. That alone was about $1,400 gone. Next were the transportation costs. Because flights were canceled day to day, and each day we were required to go back to the airport to attempt to reschedule flights and ultimately receive our hotel vouchers, we were constantly moving back and forth between hotels and the airport. Taxi after taxi, airport runs we never planned for, transfers that should have been included but weren't. Those unexpected transportation costs added up quickly because each taxi ride was over $20. We did receive meal vouchers, but they only covered about 60% of the actual cost of the food, even when eating conservatively. By the end, meals and transportation added up to about $400. And finally, there was the biggest unresolved piece at the time, the Air Greenland flights. We had paid roughly $1,600 for our intra-Greenland flights. Flights that were canceled, flights we never completed, flights the airline technically owed us a refund for, but wasn't issuing. So at that point, the total financial impact of the trip was about $3,400, not counting lost time, stress, or the emotional toll of watching an entire itinerary disappear. Now, as I've said before, I am not a travel insurance person. I'm not someone who automatically buys insurance every time I book a trip. And honestly, for most of the travel I do, I felt like I could live without it because I'm usually booking with points, I'm flexible, and if something shifts by a day, I can normally roll with it. I also use credit cards that mostly come with some type of protections and insurance. But Greenland was different, and this is where it's important to do a risk assessment to make the decision about whether or not you need insurance when traveling. The question that you need to ask yourself is, what are the odds that one problem turns into a domino effect, and how expensive is it going to be if that happens? And Greenland checked every single risk box. It was remote, there were limited flights, the schedule wasn't flexible, the whole trip relied on a tight connection inside Greenland, and a huge chunk of our costs were tied up in non-refundable tours and experiences that had strict cancellation policies. On top of that, United only operated the Newark to Nuke route twice a week, which meant if anything went wrong, there wasn't a backup flight later that day or even the next day, and suddenly one delay could easily turn into your trip is over. 6 days before departure, after seeing posts from travelers already experiencing delays on that exact route, I bought a World Nomads policy. It wasn't canceled for any reason, we were past that window, but it did include the coverage that actually mattered for this itinerary: trip delay and trip interruption. The policy cost $295 total for both my husband and I to cover our 5-day trip. The decision to buy travel insurance turned out to matter more than I expected. Once we got home, I waited a few days before even dealing with it because honestly, I needed a mental break. Then I sat down and did the unglamorous part: receipts, emails, cancellation notices, policies, screenshots, credit card statements. Filing a travel insurance claim isn't hard, but it is document heavy. Here's what World Nomads required and why. The first thing World Nomads required was proof of travel. So that meant submitting our full flight itinerary, proof of the original bookings, and confirmation emails for the affected flights and tours. This step is important because it establishes a timeline of the trip and proves that the disruption actually occurred. Then you need to submit proof that the trip was disrupted. So in my documentation, I included the cancellation emails from Air Greenland showing the flight cancellations and the rebookings, and any updated itinerary confirmations that showed the original flights versus what they changed us to. Then you need to submit proof of what you lost, which is the amount that you're claiming that you want reimbursed. For the missed tours, I submitted booking confirmations for each tour, the cancellation policy showing that they were non-refundable within the window, proof that we missed them because we weren't even in Ilulissat, which was directly caused by the flight disruptions, and proof that I had emailed the tour company attempting to secure a refund and was told no. I also submitted my incidental expenses here, which were receipts for the meals and taxis. And then I also sent credit card statements showing that I actually paid for all of these things. This is why saving receipts matters. They did come back twice asking for documents that I had initially missed, but once everything was submitted, the claim was approved. About 6 to 8 weeks later, I had my check. World Nomads reimbursed $1,800, and they didn't fight me on any of it. Now that still left one unresolved issue: the $1,600 in Air Greenland flights. Under normal circumstances, this should have been a straightforward refund. Before we even got home, I had started emailing Air Greenland to request a refund for the flights that we couldn't take. And there were no responses to any of my emails. Crickets. Follow-up emails were ignored, and there was no indication that anyone was actually reviewing my case. And this is where it's important to understand the difference between waiting politely and protecting yourself financially. At this point, I had emailed Air Greenland 4 times and gave them 2 weeks to respond, and I heard nothing back. So at that point, I escalated the situation and filed a credit card dispute with Chase, citing services not rendered. When you file a dispute, the bank temporarily credits you the disputed amount while they investigate. Then they formally notify the merchant, in this case Air Greenland, and request documentation proving that the service was provided or the cancellation terms justify keeping your money. At that point, the burden of proof shifts to the merchant. Only after the dispute was opened did Air Greenland finally respond to me. And shortly after that, the refund was issued and I got my $1,600 back. Once a bank dispute is opened, the merchant is facing potential chargeback penalties and fees. And suddenly, ignoring you is no longer an option. Filing a dispute isn't being dramatic, it's using the consumer protections that exist for exactly this reason. And the reason that I decided to do a chargeback instead of also trying to push this through the travel insurance too is because insurance is meant to reimburse losses when something goes wrong. But these flights weren't a loss. They were services that we paid for and never received. That's exactly what chargebacks are for, and Air Greenland owed us that money back. Between the travel insurance payout and the credit card dispute, I ultimately recovered all of my losses. But it took documentation, patience, and knowing which tool to use. Now that you know how this ended for me, I want to talk about something that gets oversimplified in the points and miles world: credit card insurance. Because for a long time, I assumed that having a premium travel card like the Amex Platinum or the Sapphire Reserve meant that I was covered anytime I traveled. I thought, well, I booked with points, I used the right card, I'm fine. And for many trips, that's true, until you take a trip like this one. The reality is that credit card insurance works best in very specific, controlled scenarios. And Greenland was basically the opposite of that. First, credit card insurance generally only covers expenses that were charged directly to the card offering the coverage. In my case, that already created gaps. Some tours were booked months earlier, some expenses were split across cards, some costs, like taxis, extra meals, and rebooking logistics, were paid as they came up, not thoughtfully routed through a single card tied to insurance benefits. And there are nuances with credit card coverage too. Like with the Amex Platinum, you need to pay for the round-trip flights with your card in order to get coverage for your trip. Only booking one way with that card won't give you any coverage. Second, most credit card protections are designed around delays, not full itinerary collapses. They might cover a hotel night if you're delayed 6 hours or more, or meals if your flight is pushed to the next day. But when an entire region's flight network starts unraveling, you quickly move beyond what credit card insurance is meant to handle. And third, credit card insurance doesn't usually reimburse prepaid, non-refundable experiences that you simply never get to take because you're stranded somewhere else. So I seriously doubt that they would have covered all of my missed tours. And this is where I think a lot of travelers get caught off guard, because the more comfortable you get booking complex trips, the more likely you are to assume that you can self-insure with credit insurance. And a lot of the time you probably can, but on trips with remote destinations, limited flight frequencies, no alternative routing options, expensive prepaid experiences, and zero margin for error, that assumption becomes risky. Having a standalone policy for trips like this makes sure that you have all of your bases covered. I'll link World Nomads in the description so that you can see exactly what their policies cover and decide if it makes sense for your trip. And just to be clear, World Nomads is not the only option out there. Depending on your trip, companies like Alliance, Safety Wing, and other providers might make more sense. The key isn't necessarily who you buy from, it's whether the policy actually covers the risks of the trip that you're taking. And this is where the story stops being about just my trip, because what happened to us wasn't a freak accident. The deeper I dug into this, the cancellations, the staffing issues, the lack of communication, the airport bottlenecks, the limited customer service, the clearer it became that this was not just bad timing, it was a system that isn't ready for all of the additional travelers that it's receiving. And that's exactly what I want to talk about in the next video. In part 4, I'm stepping back from our personal experiences and breaking down the broader state of travel infrastructure in Greenland, what travelers need to understand before booking a trip like this, and why some destinations, no matter how beautiful, require a very different level of planning, flexibility, and risk tolerance. Because Greenland is incredible, but it's got some serious issues that you need to know about. And if you're thinking about going, then you need to see the whole picture before you book. Click into that next video here, and I'll see you over there.